The gunshot that echoed through Prescott Canyon that frigid November night in 1876 would have killed Carter Greene if he had been standing 3 feet to the left. But fate had other plans that would change his life forever. He pressed himself against the rocky outcropping, his breath forming white clouds in the freezing Arizona air as another bullet ricocheted off the stone near his head. The bandits had been tracking him for 2 days, ever since he had witnessed them robbing the stagecoach outside Golden, and now they wanted the only thing that could send them to the gallows: his testimony and his life. Carter fired 2 quick shots from his revolver, hearing a yelp of pain followed by cursing. That made 3 bullets left, and he had no way of knowing how many men were still out there in the darkness. His horse had taken off hours ago when the shooting started, spooked by the sudden violence, and had taken most of his supplies with it. All he had was the gun on his hip, the clothes on his back, a canteen half full of water, and his bedroll with a single wool blanket strapped across his shoulders. The temperature was dropping fast. Carter had lived in Arizona long enough to know that November nights in the high country could kill a man as surely as any bullet. He waited, listening to the sounds of retreating footsteps and horses. They were leaving, probably figuring the cold would do their job for them. They were not wrong to think so. Without a fire, without shelter, without his horse, Carter knew he was in serious trouble. He waited a full hour before moving, making sure they were truly gone. His fingers were already growing numb despite his leather gloves. He needed to find shelter, and he needed to find it fast. Carter struck out on foot, following the canyon wall, searching for any kind of overhang or cave that might protect him from the worst of the wind. That was when he heard it, a soft, pained sound, almost like a wounded animal. Carter froze, his hand going to his gun. The sound came again, and this time he recognized it as distinctly human, a whimper of distress. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to focus on his own survival. But Carter had never been the kind of man who could ignore someone in need. He found her huddled behind a fallen log, barely visible in the starlight. She wore a dark traveling dress that was completely inadequate for the cold, and she was shaking so violently that he could hear her teeth chattering from 10 feet away. Her face was pale, her lips beginning to turn blue. "Miss," Carter approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Miss, are you hurt?" She looked up at him with eyes that even in the darkness seemed to reflect an unusual depth of intelligence and strength, though right now they were glazed with cold and exhaustion. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "Help me." Carter did not hesitate. He shrugged off his bedroll and unfolded his blanket, the only one he had. It was a decision that could cost him his life, but looking at her shivering form, he knew he had no choice. He wrapped the thick wool blanket around her shoulders and pulled her to her feet. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though she swayed dangerously. Carter wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her weight, and continued his search for shelter. She leaned heavily against him, and he could feel the violent tremors running through her body. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, partly to keep her conscious, partly because he was genuinely curious. A woman alone in the Arizona wilderness at night was unusual to say the least. "Stage," she managed to say. "Attacked, I ran." Carter felt his stomach drop. The same stage he had witnessed being robbed. How long ago? Hours, maybe more. Lost track. He tightened his grip on her, moving faster. She had been out here for hours in this cold, wearing nothing but that thin dress. It was a miracle she was still alive. They rounded a bend in the canyon, and Carter breathed a prayer of thanks. There, carved into the rock face by wind and time, was a shallow cave, not deep but enough to provide shelter from the wind. He guided her inside and helped her sit down against the back wall. The cave was barely large enough for two people, which meant their shared body heat would help keep them both alive. Carter sat down beside her, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I am going to sit close," he said. "We need to share warmth. That all right with you?" She nodded, and he moved closer, wrapping an arm around her and pulling her against his side. She did not resist, instead burrowing into his warmth like a small animal seeking shelter. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound her chattering teeth and the whistle of wind across the cave opening. "I am Carter," he said finally. "Carter Greene." "Rose," she replied, her voice slightly stronger now. "Rose Kingston." "Well, Miss Kingston, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Despite everything, he heard a soft sound that might have been a laugh. "As do I, Mr. Greene." They fell silent again. Carter could feel the cold seeping into his bones now that he had given up his blanket. His shirt and vest provided some protection, but not nearly enough. He started to shiver himself, though he tried to hide it. Rose noticed. Of course she noticed. "You are cold," she said. "I will be fine. You gave me your only blanket. You needed it more." She was quiet for a moment, then she shifted, opening the blanket. "Then we share it. There is enough for both of us if we stay close." Carter hesitated. It was improper, sitting this close to a woman he had just met, sharing a blanket in the darkness. But propriety was a luxury for people who were not freezing to death in the Arizona high country. He moved closer, and she draped half the blanket over his shoulders, pulling it tight around both of them. The warmth was immediate and blessed. She pressed closer to him, and he wrapped both arms around her, their bodies fitting together naturally. Her head rested on his shoulder, and he could smell her hair, something floral despite the dust and cold. "Thank you," she whispered, "for stopping, for helping me." Most men would have kept walking. "I am not most men," Carter replied. "I can see that." They talked through the long night, partly to stay awake, partly because there was nothing else to do. Carter learned that she had been traveling from California to Santa Fe, that she had been running from something, though she would not say what. She learned that he worked as a ranch hand, that he had been on his way to testify against the men who had attacked the stage, that he had lost both his parents to cholera when he was 15 and had been on his own ever since. "You are 26 now?" she asked. 27 in January. "You?" 23 last month. As the hours passed, they stopped shivering. Carter was not sure if that was because they were warming up or because their bodies were giving up, but he chose to believe the former. Rose fell asleep against his shoulder sometime around what he guessed was 3 in the morning, her breathing deep and even. Carter stayed awake, keeping watch, making sure she kept breathing, making sure the cold did not take her. The first hint of dawn came as a pale gray light at the cave entrance. Carter watched it grow slowly, his arms still wrapped around the sleeping woman. She had survived the night. They both had. Against all odds, they had survived. As the sun rose higher, its rays finally reaching into the cave, Rose stirred. She lifted her head from his shoulder, blinking sleep from her eyes. In the growing light, Carter got his first real look at her. She was beautiful, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins during the night, falling in waves around her face. Her eyes, which he could now see clearly, were a striking green, intelligent and assessing. But there was something else in those eyes as she looked at him in the dawn light. Something that looked like resolve and perhaps a touch of fear. "There is something I need to tell you," she said quietly. Carter felt a flutter of concern. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, then reached into the collar of her dress and pulled out something that had been hidden there. A badge. A federal marshal's badge. "My name is Rose Kingston," she said. "I am a Deputy United States Marshal working undercover. I was on that stage because I have been tracking those bandits for 3 months. They are wanted for robbery and murder across 3 territories. Carter stared at the badge, then at her face, trying to process this information. You are a marshal. I know it is unusual. There are not many women in law enforcement, but I have been doing this for 2 years now. I work cases where a woman can get places a man cannot, learn things a man cannot learn. She watched him carefully, as if waiting for his reaction. The stage attack was supposed to be my chance to infiltrate their gang. I was going to play the helpless victim they rescued. But then you were there, witnessing everything, and they panicked and started shooting. Everything went wrong. That is why you were really out here, Carter said slowly. Not just running from the attack, you were trying to track them. She nodded. I lost them in the darkness, and then the cold started to set in. I thought I was going to die out there. Her hand covered his, which still rested on her shoulder. You saved my life. Carter looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had been hiding such an incredible truth. He should have been angry that she had deceived him, even briefly. Instead, all he felt was admiration and something else, something that had been growing through the long night they had spent pressed together, sharing warmth and stories. Well, he said finally, I am glad I did. The world needs more people like you, I reckon, people willing to risk everything to bring bad men to justice. Relief flooded her face. You are not angry I did not tell you right away. You did not know me. For all you knew, I could have been one of them. He smiled at her. Though I am a mite curious why you are telling me now. Because I trust you, she said simply. You gave me your only blanket. You held me all night to keep me warm, and you were nothing but a gentleman about it. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. She paused. And because I need your help, my help, you witnessed the robbery. You saw their faces. Combined with what I know, we might have enough to track them down and bring them in. She looked at him intently. But more than that, you know this territory. I am from Nevada originally. I do not know Arizona like someone who lives here would. Carter thought about it. He had been planning to give his testimony and then head back to the ranch where he worked. It was a simple life, a safe life. What she was suggesting was dangerous. Those men wanted him dead. Going after them actively would be walking right into the lion's den. But when he looked at Rose, at the determination in her green eyes, at the courage it must have taken to become a marshal in a world dominated by men, he found his answer was already decided. I will help you, he said. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, and Carter felt his heart do something strange in his chest. Thank you, she said. Truly. They emerged from the cave into the cold morning sunlight. The wind had died down and the temperature was already rising as the sun climbed higher. They needed water, food, and horses, not necessarily in that order. Carter still had his canteen, which they shared, drinking sparingly. There is a small settlement about 10 miles east of here, Carter said, getting his bearings from the sun and the landmarks he recognized. Place called Copper Creek. We can get supplies there, maybe rent horses. Can we make it 10 miles on foot? We do not have much choice, but at least it is warming up. They started walking, staying close to the canyon wall for as long as they could before the terrain forced them out into the open. Carter kept his eyes scanning the horizon, watching for any sign of the bandits. His gun was ready, though with only 3 bullets, he hoped he would not need to use it. As they walked, Rose told him more about her work as a marshal. She had joined the service after her brother, also a marshal, had been killed in the line of duty. She had wanted to continue his work to make a difference. It had not been easy convincing the marshal service to take her on, but she had proven herself time and again. The men I work with still do not all accept me, she admitted. They think I am playing at being a lawman, that I will get someone killed with my incompetence. So I work twice as hard, take twice the risks to prove them wrong. Sounds lonely, Carter said. She glanced at him, surprised by his perceptiveness. It is, she admitted. Very lonely. They walked in comfortable silence after that, the miles passing slowly beneath their feet. The sun was high overhead when they finally spotted the buildings of Copper Creek in the distance. It was not much of a town, just a collection of wooden structures huddled around a crossroads, but to Carter and Rose, it looked like paradise. They stumbled into the general store, and the proprietor, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, took one look at them and immediately brought out water and food. "You two look like you have been through hell," he said. "Something like that," Carter replied, drinking deeply from the cup of water. Rose showed her badge. "I am Deputy Marshal Kingston. I need to send a telegram to the Territorial Marshal's office in Phoenix, and we need to purchase supplies and rent 2 horses." The proprietor's eyes widened at the sight of the badge, but he nodded quickly. "Yes, madam. Telegraph office is next door. As for horses, my son has 2 you can take. Good animals, sure-footed." While Rose sent her telegram, Carter purchased supplies: food, ammunition, bedrolls, canteens, and 2 heavy coats. He paid for everything with money from his own pocket, watching his carefully saved wages disappear. Rose tried to protest when she returned and saw what he had bought, saying the Marshal Service would reimburse him, but he waved her off. "Consider it my contribution to justice," he said. They ate a hot meal at the settlement's small restaurant, the first real food they had had in over a day. Carter watched Rose as she ate, noting the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, always alert. She was unlike any woman he had ever met, and he found himself drawn to her in a way that both excited and frightened him. After they ate, they met with the proprietor's son, a young man named Daniel, who showed them the horses. They were good animals as promised, a sturdy bay gelding and a smaller but spirited chestnut mare. "The Marshal Service will pay you fair rental price," Rose assured Daniel, who looked slightly star-struck at meeting a real female marshal. "Just bring them back in one piece," he said. "And yourselves too." They mounted up as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Rose had received a reply to her telegram. The Territorial Marshal was sending backup, but they would not arrive for at least 2 days. In the meantime, Rose was authorized to pursue the bandits with whatever help she could muster, which currently consisted of 1 cowboy with a good heart and a steady aim. "The stage attack happened about 20 miles north of here," Rose said as they rode. "If we head there, I might be able to pick up their trail." "Those men know I saw them," Carter reminded her. "They will be expecting me to come forward, maybe even expecting law enforcement to come looking." "Good point. They will be cautious, probably moving fast to get out of the territory." She frowned, thinking. But they hit the stage near Golden, which means they are probably working out of somewhere nearby. Bandits need a base, especially a gang this organized. "You think they are holed up around here somewhere?" "I do. And I think I know where," she explained as they rode. Through her months of investigation, she had learned that the gang was led by a man named Jack Dalton, a former Confederate soldier who had turned to crime after the war. He was smart, careful, and absolutely ruthless. But he was also known to have family in Arizona, a cousin who owned a ranch in the hills north of Golden. "It is the perfect hiding place," Rose said. "Remote, defendable, and with a legitimate cover for any comings and goings. So we ride to this ranch and do what? Just the 2 of us against however many of them there are. We scout it out. We gather evidence. When the backup arrives, we will have everything we need to raid the place and bring them all in." Carter nodded slowly. It was a solid plan, though dangerous. But everything about this situation was dangerous. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping only once to water the horses and rest briefly. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwood trees near a creek. Carter built a fire while Rose tended to the horses. They worked together with an easy coordination that surprised them both, as if they had been trail partners for years, rather than people who had just met the night before. When the fire was crackling warmly, they sat down on opposite sides of it, eating the jerky and hardtack they had purchased in Copper Creek. "Tell me about the ranch where you work," Rose said. "What is it like?" Carter smiled, gazing into the fire. "It is a good place. The owner, Mr. Patterson, is a fair man. The work is hard but honest. Long days in the saddle, mending fences, driving cattle, breaking horses. In the summer it is hot as blazes. In the winter it is cold enough to freeze. But there is something satisfying about it, you know. About working with your hands, about seeing the results of your labor. You love it," Rose observed. "I do," Carter admitted. "It is the first place I have felt like I belonged since my parents died. The other ranch hands are good men. We look out for each other." He glanced at her. "What about you? What is your life like when you are not chasing criminals?" Rose laughed softly. "I do not think I have a life when I am not chasing criminals. This work, it consumes you. Every waking moment is spent thinking about the case, about the next lead, the next piece of evidence. I have a small room in a boarding house in Phoenix that I barely see. No real friends to speak of, except maybe the boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, who makes sure I eat when I am in town." "That is no way to live," Carter said gently. "Maybe not," Rose agreed, "but it is the life I chose. The life my brother would have wanted me to live, continuing his work." "What would you do if you were not a marshal?" The question seemed to surprise her. She stared into the fire, silent for a long moment. "I do not know," she said finally. "I have never really thought about it. Maybe I would have a little house somewhere, a garden. Maybe I would teach school or run a shop. Maybe I would have a family." She looked up at him, and in the firelight her eyes seemed to glow. "What about you? Is ranching all you want from life?" "I used to think so," Carter said. "But lately, I have been feeling like something is missing, like there should be more." He held her gaze. "Meeting you, seeing what you do, how you risk everything for what you believe in, it makes me think maybe I have been playing it too safe. Maybe there is more I could be doing." "Do not romanticize what I do," Rose said, but there was no harshness in her voice. "It is dangerous, lonely work. I have seen good people die. I have killed men myself, and that never gets easier." "I am not romanticizing it," Carter replied. "I am just saying, you have shown me that there are different ways to live, different ways to make a difference. And I admire that. I admire you." Rose looked away, but not before he saw the flush rise in her cheeks. "You barely know me. I know you were brave enough to become a marshal in a world that does not want women in that role. I know you were willing to freeze to death tracking criminals because you believe in justice. I know you are smart, determined, and you do not give up." He paused. "And I know that sharing my blanket with you last night, keeping you warm, it felt like the most important thing I have ever done." She met his eyes again, and something passed between them, something electric and undeniable. "Carter," she said softly. "I know it is too soon," he said quickly. "I know we just met, but I would be lying if I said I did not feel something, something I have never felt before." "I feel it too," Rose admitted. "And it scares me because I cannot afford to feel this way. Not now, not with this case still open, not with those men still out there." "Then we finish the case," Carter said. "We bring them to justice, and then we see where this goes together." Rose smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Together," she agreed. They talked late into the night, sitting by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Rose told him about growing up in Nevada. about her brother who had raised her after their parents died, about the day she got the telegram saying he had been killed. Carter told her about his childhood in Texas, about traveling to Arizona looking for work, about the dreams he had of one day having his own small ranch. When they finally lay down to sleep, they set out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, propriety demanding some distance. But Carter lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars, thinking about the remarkable woman sleeping across from him. They woke at dawn and were back on the trail within an hour. The ranch Rose believed was sheltering the gang was still a half-day's ride north. They moved at a steady pace, letting the horses set the speed, conserving their strength for whatever was to come. Around midday, they stopped at a small stream to let the horses drink and rest. As they sat on the bank, sharing water and dried fruit, Carter noticed something in the distance. Dust on the horizon moving fast. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing. Rose immediately went on alert. She pulled out a small telescope from her saddlebag and extended it, scanning the horizon. "4 of them," she reported, "moving fast, heading east. Could be anyone." "Could be," she agreed. "But my gut tells me it is them." They watched the riders until they disappeared from view. Rose lowered the telescope, frowning thoughtfully. "They were coming from the direction of the ranch. If it is them, they might be running. Or they might be planning something else," Carter suggested. "Another job. Either way, we need to check out that ranch. If it is their base, there might be evidence there. And if they are planning something, we need to know what." They remounted and changed direction slightly, angling toward where Rose believed the ranch was located. The sun was past its zenith when they finally spotted it, a collection of weathered buildings nestled in a small valley. Smoke rose from the main house's chimney, indicating someone was home. They approached cautiously, leaving the horses tied in a grove of trees a quarter-mile away and continuing on foot. Carter had his revolver ready, and Rose carried a rifle she had purchased in Copper Creek. They moved silently, using the terrain for cover, working their way close enough to observe the ranch without being seen. From their vantage point behind a rocky outcropping, they could see the layout clearly. The main house was well maintained, larger than most ranch houses. There was a barn, a bunkhouse, and several other outbuildings. Horses in the corral, cattle in the near pasture. To anyone passing by, it would look like a legitimate working ranch, but Carter's practiced eye caught the details that did not fit. The horses in the corral were too fine, too well-bred for a simple ranch. There were too many of them, more than a working ranch would need. And the men he could see moving around the property moved with a wariness that spoke of men expecting trouble. "This is it," Rose breathed. "This is their base." They watched for over an hour, counting men and making mental notes of the layout. Rose sketched a rough map in her notebook, marking entrances, exits, and positions. They counted at least 8 men, maybe more inside the buildings. "Too many for just the 2 of us to take," Carter said. "Agreed. We wait for backup." She looked at him. "But we need to keep watching, make sure they do not run before the marshals arrive." They established a surveillance position with a good view of the ranch and took turns watching through the telescope while the other rested. As evening fell, they saw the 4 riders they had spotted earlier return, confirming Rose's suspicion. This was definitely the gang's hideout. Night fell and they kept their watch. Carter was on duty, peering through the telescope, when he saw movement that made his blood run cold. A wagon rolled up to the main house, and men started loading it with crates and bags. They were packing up, getting ready to run. "Rose," he whispered urgently, "they are moving out." She was instantly alert, taking the telescope and confirming what he had seen. "Damn it, they must know we are onto them or they are spooked for some other reason." She lowered the telescope, her face set in grim determination. "We cannot let them disappear. If they scatter, it could take months to track them all down again." "What do you suggest?" She was silent for a moment, clearly weighing options. "We go in, tonight, just you and me." "That is suicide. There are at least a dozen of them." "Not if we are smart about it. We wait until most of them are asleep. We sneak in, secure the evidence, and then we set the barn on fire. In the confusion, while they are fighting the fire, we take their horses so they cannot run. By the time they figure out what happened, the backup marshals will be here." It was a crazy plan, full of risks and things that could go wrong. But looking at Rose's determined face, Carter found himself nodding. "All right, but we do this my way. I know ranches. I know how men move and think in situations like this. You follow my lead on the approach, and I will follow yours once we are there." Rose smiled. "Deal." They waited until well past midnight, until the lights in the bunkhouse and main house had been dark for hours. Then they moved, silent as ghosts, working their way down from their observation point to the ranch complex. Carter led the way, using every bit of cover, every shadow. They reached the barn without incident. Inside, as Carter had suspected, they found evidence: bags of money, jewelry, papers documenting various robberies. Rose quickly gathered what she could carry, stuffing it into a saddlebag she had brought with her. "Got enough," Carter whispered. "More than enough to convict them all," she confirmed. They moved to the horses next. There were 15 in the corral, sleepy but well-trained. Carter whispered soothingly to them as he opened the corral gate, then fired his pistol into the air 3 times. The horses bolted, scattering into the night, and the ranch exploded into chaos. Men poured out of the bunkhouse and main house, shouting and confused. In the darkness and confusion, Carter and Rose ran, heading for the cover of the rocks. Behind them, someone shouted that the horses were gone, that they had been robbed. They made it to their observation point and kept running, back to where they had left their own horses. Behind them, the ranch was a hive of angry, confused activity. By the time the bandits realized what had happened, Carter and Rose were already mounted and riding hard into the night. They rode for hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the ranch. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they stopped to rest the horses and catch their breath. "We did it," Rose said, slightly breathless, holding up the saddlebag full of evidence. "We actually did it." Carter started to laugh, the adrenaline and tension of the night releasing all at once. Rose joined in, and they stood there in the growing light, laughing together like lunatics. "That was the craziest thing I have ever done," Carter said when he finally got his breath back. "Welcome to my world," Rose replied, grinning. They looked at each other, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something more intense. They were standing very close, breathing hard, alive and victorious. Carter reached up and gently touched her face, and Rose leaned into his hand. "Rose," he said softly. "Yes, I think I am falling in love with you." She caught her breath. "Carter, it has only been 2 days, I know, but I also know what I feel. Sharing that blanket with you, watching you work, seeing your courage and your heart, fighting alongside you tonight, it all just made it clearer." He stroked her cheek with his thumb. "I love you, Rose Kingston." "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I do." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. They stood there in the dawn light, holding each other, kissing like they had all the time in the world instead of being fugitives from a gang of desperate criminals. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "We should keep moving," Rose said, though she made no move to step away from him. "We should," Carter agreed, also not moving. They kissed again, shorter this time before finally, reluctantly, separating. They mounted their horses and continued east, back toward Golden where the backup marshals were supposed to meet them. They rode close together, their legs occasionally brushing, constantly aware of each other. Around noon, they spotted riders ahead. Rose tensed, reaching for her rifle, but then she relaxed. It is them, the marshals. There were 6 of them, led by a grizzled man with a marshal's badge pinned prominently to his vest. He pulled up as Carter and Rose approached, his eyes taking in their disheveled appearance, the exhaustion evident in their faces, the way they rode close together. "Deputy Kingston," he said, "I am Marshal Webb. Got your telegram. Looks like you have had an interesting few days." "That is putting it mildly, sir," Rose replied. She dismounted and showed him the evidence they had gathered, explained about the ranch, about the gang's plans to move out. Marshal Webb listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. When she finished, he nodded approvingly. "Good work, Deputy." "Very good work." He glanced at Carter. "And who might you be?" "Carter Greene, sir. I am the witness from the stage robbery. Miss Kingston and I ran into each other out in the canyon, and I have been helping her track the gang." "He is the reason I am alive," Rose added. "He saved my life when I was caught in the cold, and he has been instrumental in gathering this evidence." Marshal Webb looked between them, and something in his expression suggested he saw more than just a professional partnership. But all he said was, "Well, Mr. Greene, the Marshal Service owes you a debt of gratitude. Now, if you will excuse us, we have some criminals to apprehend." "I would like to come with you," Rose said. "See this through." "Absolutely not," Webb replied firmly. "You have been up for who knows how many hours, you are exhausted, and you have already done your part. You and Mr. Greene head to Golden, get some rest, and file your official reports. We will handle the arrest." Rose looked like she wanted to argue, but Webb's expression brooked no disagreement. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, sir." Webb and his men rode off toward the ranch. Carter and Rose watched them go, then turned their horses toward Golden. They rode in comfortable silence for a while before Carter spoke. "Are you disappointed, not being there for the arrest?" "A little," Rose admitted. "But mostly I am just tired. And Webb was right, we have earned some rest." She smiled at him. "Besides, I would rather spend the time with you than watching them round up criminals I have been tracking for months." They reached Golden as the sun was setting, painting the little town in warm gold light that seemed to justify its name. It was a small place, barely more than a wide spot in the road, but it had a hotel, a saloon, a general store, and a telegraph office. It looked like heaven to 2 people who had been sleeping on the ground and facing death for the past 2 days. They secured rooms at the hotel, separate rooms because they were not married, and Rose had a reputation to maintain. But after they had both bathed and changed into clean clothes that Rose purchased at the general store, they met in the hotel's small dining room for dinner. Carter cleaned up well. His dark hair was still damp from the bath, combed back from his face, showing strong features and warm brown eyes. He wore a fresh shirt and vest, looking every inch the respectable cowboy. Rose had let her auburn hair down, and it fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She wore a simple but pretty blue dress, and Carter thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. They ate slowly, savoring the hot food and each other's company. They talked about everything and nothing, learning more about each other, building on the foundation they had started in that cold cave what felt like a lifetime ago but was really only 2 nights past. "What happens now?" Carter asked as they finished their meal. "For you, I mean, with the case." "I will file my report. There will be a trial and I will have to testify. After that," she shrugged, "there will be another case. There always is." And you will move on to the next town, the next investigation, the next group of criminals. That is the job, she said, but he heard the note of sadness in her voice. It does not have to be, Carter said carefully. He reached across the table and took her hand. I meant what I said this morning. I love you, Rose. And I know it is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I also know that what I feel for you is real. More real than anything I have ever felt. Carter. I am not asking you to give up being a marshal if that is what you want. I would never ask that. But maybe there is a way to have both. Maybe you could be based out of Arizona, take cases in the territory, and have a home to come back to. A home with me. Rose's eyes were shining with unshed tears. You are asking me to marry you. After 2 days. I am asking you to consider it, to think about what we could have together. I know it is crazy, I know it is fast. But Rose, life is short and uncertain. We both almost died 2 nights ago. If that taught me anything, it is that when you find something worth holding on to, you grab it with both hands and do not let go. A tear escaped, running down her cheek. I do love you. I do. But I am scared. Scared of losing myself in someone else. Scared of giving up the work I have dedicated my life to. Scared of being hurt. I am scared too, Carter admitted. Scared you will say no. Scared you will ride away and I will never see you again. But I am more scared of not asking, of letting you go without fighting for what we could have. They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped across the table. Finally, Rose spoke. I need time. Not long, just time to think, to file my report, to see this case through. Can you give me that? I can give you all the time you need, Carter said. I am not going anywhere. They walked outside together, standing on the hotel's porch in the cool evening air. The street was quiet, the town settling down for the night. Carter turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Whatever you decide, know that these past 2 days have meant everything to me, he said. You have changed my life, Rose Kingston. You have changed mine too, she replied. She stood on her toes and kissed him softly. Good night, Carter. Good night, Rose. He watched her go inside and climb the stairs to her room, then stood on the porch for a long while, looking up at the stars, thinking about the remarkable woman who had stumbled into his life in the middle of a frozen night. The next morning, Carter woke to a knock on his door. He opened it to find a telegram boy holding a message. For you, sir, from Marshal Webb. Carter tipped the boy and read the telegram. The raid on the ranch had been successful. All members of the gang had been arrested without shots fired, caught completely off guard. They had recovered significant additional evidence. The trial would be held in Prescott in 2 weeks, and Carter's testimony would be required. He found Rose in the dining room, eating breakfast. She had received the same telegram. They sat together, drinking coffee, discussing the news. 2 weeks, Rose said. I need to go to Phoenix, file my report, and prepare for the trial after that. She trailed off. After that, you decide what comes next, Carter finished. They spent the day in Golden, Rose handling official business while Carter arranged for the rental horses to be returned and his own horse, which had been found wandering near Copper Creek, to be brought to town. They came together for lunch, then dinner, stealing what moments they could, knowing that in the morning Rose would leave for Phoenix. That evening, walking together under the stars, Rose finally spoke the words that had been building all day. Come with me. Carter stopped walking. What? Come to Phoenix with me. I know you have to go back to your ranch, give your notice, but after that, come to Phoenix. Stay with me through the trial. Give us a real chance to know each other, not just in crisis but in normal life. See if what we feel is real or just the product of extreme circumstances. Carter felt hope bloom in his chest. You mean it. I mean it. I am terrified, but I am also more sure of this than I have been of anything in a long time. I love you, Carter Greene. I want to see where this can go." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. When they broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "I will come," he promised. "As soon as I can settle things at the ranch, I will come to Phoenix." They stood there, holding each other, making plans and promises. Carter would go back to the ranch, explain the situation to Mr. Patterson, and work out his notice. It would take about a week. Then he would come to Phoenix, where Rose would be living in her boarding house room, preparing for the trial. The next morning, they parted ways. Rose headed south toward Phoenix, and Carter rode west toward the ranch where he worked. They kissed goodbye in front of the hotel, not caring who saw, holding each other as if they could delay the inevitable separation. "1 week," Rose said. "1 week," Carter confirmed. "I will be there. I will be waiting." He watched her ride away until she disappeared from sight, then mounted his own horse and headed in the opposite direction. The ride back to the ranch gave him plenty of time to think, to wonder if he was making a mistake, to second-guess everything. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the feeling of Rose in his arms, the sound of her laughter, the courage in her eyes. No, this was right. This was where he was meant to be. Mr. Patterson, the ranch owner, was understanding when Carter explained that he needed to leave. He had heard about the stage robbery, about Carter's testimony being needed, and he did not press for details when Carter said he had personal business to attend to in Phoenix. "You have been a good hand," Patterson said, shaking Carter's hand. "You ever need work in the future, you have a place here." "I appreciate that, sir, truly." Carter spent the week working hard, saying goodbye to the other ranch hands, the men he had worked alongside for the past 3 years. They gave him hell, joking about whatever woman had finally caught the elusive Carter Greene, but it was good-natured, and several told him they wished him well. On the morning of the 8th day, Carter saddled his horse, packed his few belongings, and rode out toward Phoenix. He carried his life savings in his pocket, about $300 carefully saved over years of work, enough to start fresh if needed. Phoenix was bigger than he expected, a growing city in the heart of the territory. He found the boarding house where Rose was staying easily enough, a neat 2-story building run by the Mrs. Chen she had mentioned. He was shown to a room on the first floor, and then Mrs. Chen, a small Chinese woman with kind eyes and a knowing smile, told him that Miss Kingston was in the parlor. He found her sitting by the window, reading through papers, probably related to the case. She looked up when he entered, and the smile that lit her face was worth every mile he had ridden, every doubt he had wrestled with. "You came," she said, standing. "I said I would." She crossed the room and walked straight into his arms. They held each other for a long moment, and Carter felt the last of his doubts fade away. This was right. This was home. Not a place, but this woman, this moment, this feeling. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Rose worked on her case during the day, and Carter explored Phoenix, learning the city, looking for opportunities. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, either at the boarding house or at one of the restaurants in town, then walk through the streets, talking and laughing, building their relationship on a foundation of honesty and shared dreams. Carter found work at a stable on the edge of town, using his skills with horses. It was temporary, just until the trial was over and they figured out their next steps, but it felt good to be working, to be contributing. The trial took place in Prescott as scheduled. Carter and Rose traveled there together, along with Marshal Webb and several other lawmen. The trial lasted 3 days. Carter gave his testimony about witnessing the robbery, identifying the men he had seen. Rose testified about her investigation, presenting the evidence they had gathered. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts for all the defendants. The judge sentenced them to long prison terms, and Jack Dalton, the gang leader, received an additional sentence for murder in connection with the death of Rose's brother. A connection Rose's investigation had finally proven. After the sentencing, Rose stood outside the courthouse looking drained but satisfied. "It is over," she said. "Finally over." "What now?" Carter asked. She turned to him, taking his hands. "Now we figure out our future together." They returned to Phoenix and spent the next several weeks discussing possibilities. Rose loved her work as a marshal, but she admitted that the constant travel, the loneliness, was wearing on her. Carter had enjoyed his time at the stable but knew it was not a long-term solution. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marshal Webb visited them in Phoenix with a proposition. The Territorial Marshal Service was establishing a new office in Tucson, focused on investigating crimes in southern Arizona. They needed someone to run it, someone with Rose's skills and dedication. It would still be marshal work, but with a permanent base, a real office, and a steady presence in one location. "You could have a life," Webb told Rose. "A home, and still do the work you love. We need you, Rose. You are one of the best investigators we have." Rose looked at Carter, a question in her eyes. "Tucson. I hear it is a nice town," Carter said. "Growing fast. Probably needs people with ranching experience, people who know horses." She smiled. "Are you sure? You would be willing to move to start over?" "Rose, my home is wherever you are." "Tucson sounds perfect." That evening, as they sat in the boarding house parlor, Rose made it official. "Move to Tucson with me, not just as, well, whatever we are now, but as my husband. Marry me, Carter Greene." Carter laughed, pulling her close. "I thought I was supposed to ask you." "I am a modern woman. I can ask if I want to." But her eyes were uncertain, vulnerable. "Is that a yes?" "That is absolutely a yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will move to Tucson with you. Yes to everything forever." They married the next week in a simple ceremony at a small church in Phoenix. Mrs. Chen stood as witness for Rose, and the stable owner where Carter worked stood for him. Marshal Webb attended, along with several of Rose's colleagues from the Marshal Service. It was a small wedding but perfect. Rose wore a simple white dress, and Carter wore his best suit, purchased specially for the occasion. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Carter kissed her thoroughly, to applause and laughter from their small group of guests. They honeymooned in Phoenix for a week, staying in a nice hotel, exploring the city together as a married couple. Then they packed up their belongings, said their goodbyes, and traveled south to Tucson. The city was indeed growing, a vibrant community with a mix of Mexican and American influences. Rose's new office was a small building on the main street, with 2 rooms, one for official business and one in the back that she could use for investigating and record-keeping. They found a small house on the outskirts of town, with enough land for a few horses and room to expand. It needed work, but it was theirs, the first real home either of them had owned. Carter found work at a large ranch outside Tucson, using his skills and experience. But more than that, he found purpose. He helped Rose with her cases, using his knowledge of the territory and his understanding of how criminals thought. He became her unofficial partner, the person she trusted most to watch her back. Life settled into a rhythm. Rose investigated crimes, tracked down evidence, made arrests. Carter worked the ranch, trained horses, and supported his wife in whatever ways she needed. They were partners in every sense of the word, their lives intertwined, their love growing deeper every day. 2 years after they moved to Tucson, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, worried about how she would balance motherhood with her work as a marshal. But Carter assured her they would figure it out together, and they did. Their son was born in the spring of 1879, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him James, after Rose's brother, and he became the center of their world. Rose continued her work, though she was more selective about which cases she took, focusing on investigations rather than dangerous pursuits. Carter was a devoted father, often bringing James to the ranch with him, teaching him about horses and the land even before he could walk. 3 years later, they had a daughter, Catherine, with auburn hair and her father's warm smile. Their little house had been expanded, growing to accommodate their growing family. Carter had been promoted to foreman at the ranch, and Rose had gained a reputation as one of the finest investigators in the territory. They faced challenges, of course. There were times when Rose's work took her away for days or weeks at a time, leaving Carter to manage the children alone. There were times when money was tight, when cases went unsolved, when the weight of her responsibilities threatened to overwhelm her. But through it all, they had each other, that unshakable foundation built on a cold night in a canyon when a cowboy had shared his last blanket with a shivering stranger. One evening, 15 years after that fateful night, Carter and Rose sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the Arizona desert. Their children were inside, James now 15 and helping around the ranch, Catherine 12, and showing signs of her mother's fierce independence. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked, her hand in his. "Giving up your simple life for all this chaos?" Carter looked at her, at this remarkable woman who had captured his heart so completely. At 42, she was as beautiful as the day he met her, though there was silver now in her auburn hair and lines around her eyes from years of smiling. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built, our children, our home, all of it, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "I love you," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "Thank you for sharing your blanket with me that night, for saving my life, for changing it. Thank you for trusting me enough to reveal who you really were at sunrise, for giving me a chance, for loving me back." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Inside, they could hear their children laughing, arguing about something inconsequential. It was a good sound, the sound of a full, rich life. "Tell me the story again," Catherine's voice called from inside. "About how you and Papa met." Rose smiled and called back, "Come out here and we will tell you together." James and Catherine tumbled out onto the porch, settling at their parents' feet like they had done countless times before. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Arizona sky, Carter and Rose told the story of a freezing November night, a desperate act of kindness, and a love that had changed 2 lives forever. They told about the cold canyon, the shared blanket, the long night of talking and shivering and slowly falling in love. They told about the revelation at sunrise, about tracking down criminals and building a life together. They never tired of telling it, and their children never tired of hearing it. As the evening grew late and the children finally went to bed, Carter pulled Rose close, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders, echoing that first night. "You remember being so cold you thought you might die?" he asked. "I remember thinking that if I died, at least I would die next to someone kind and good." She looked up at him. "I never imagined I would live to spend decades with that person." "Here is to decades more," Carter said, kissing her softly. Years continued to pass. James grew up and became a lawman himself, following in his mother's footsteps but blazing his own trail. He married a schoolteacher and gave Carter and Rose 3 grandchildren. Catherine became a lawyer, one of the first female attorneys in Arizona, fighting for justice in her own way. She married a doctor, and they had 2 children of their own. Carter and Rose grew old together, their love never dimming. Rose eventually retired from active martial work, but she stayed on as a consultant, her experience and knowledge too valuable to lose. Carter finally achieved his dream of owning his own small ranch, a modest spread with good horses and better memories. On a cool November evening in 1901, 25 years to the day after they met, Carter and Rose made a trip back to the canyon where their story began. They were older now, their steps slower, their hair white, but their hands were still clasped together as they climbed to the shallow cave that had sheltered them that fateful night. "It looks smaller than I remember," Rose said, studying the cave. "Everything looks smaller when you are young and scared," Carter replied. "But it was big enough to save our lives that night." They stood at the cave entrance, looking out at the canyon as the sun set, painting the rocks in shades of gold and red. Carter pulled Rose close and she rested her head on his shoulder, just as she had done that first cold night. "Would you do it again?" she asked. "Knowing everything that would come, all the challenges and fears and uncertainties, would you still give me your blanket?" "In a heartbeat," Carter said without hesitation. "I would give you 1,000 blankets. I would give you everything I have, every single time, because loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. And I would still trust you enough to reveal my true identity at sunrise," Rose replied. "Because you proved that night that you were worthy of that trust, and every day since you have proven it again." They stayed until the stars came out, the same stars that had watched over them that first night. Then they made their way back to their horses and rode home together, to the house full of love and memories they had built. Carter Greene lived to the age of 78, passing peacefully in his sleep with Rose holding his hand, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. His last words were, "I love you, Rose. Thank you for that night in the canyon." Rose Kingston Greene outlived him by 3 years, continuing to consult on difficult cases almost until the end. She passed at the age of 74, and her last words were about Carter, about the cowboy who had shared his last blanket with a shivering stranger and changed her life forever. They were buried side by side in a cemetery overlooking Tucson, under a shared headstone that read, "Carter Greene and Rose Kingston Greene, partners in life, love, and justice." Their story began with a blanket shared on a cold night, and it ended only when death itself could not keep them apart. But in a way, their story never really ended. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, who told the tale to their own children. It lived on in the cases Rose solved and the horses Carter trained. It lived on in every act of kindness done without expectation of reward, every moment when someone chose to help a stranger in need. Most of all, it lived on as a reminder that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, at the most unexpected times. That sometimes the biggest decisions of our lives happen in an instant, when we choose compassion over self-preservation, trust over fear, hope over despair. Years after they were both gone, James Greene stood at his parents' grave with his own grandchildren and told them the story once more. He told them about a freezing night, a desperate woman, and a cowboy who gave away his only protection from the cold because it was the right thing to do. "Your great-grandfather saved your great-grandmother's life that night," James said. But what he did not know, what neither of them knew, was that she saved his life too. She gave him purpose, partnership, and a love that lasted until his final breath and beyond. That is what real love is, children. It is not just romance and passion, though those matter. It is choosing each other, every single day, through cold nights and warm ones, through fear and joy, through everything life throws at you. He looked at the headstone, at the names of the two people who had shaped his entire world. They started as strangers in a canyon, but they ended as one soul in two bodies. That is the legacy they left us. That is the story we will always tell. As the sun set over Tucson, painting the sky in brilliant colors, a cool wind blew through the cemetery. James could have sworn he heard laughter on that wind, warm and familiar, the sound of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth remembering. The story of Carter Greene and Rose Kingston became a legend in Arizona. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, in courtrooms and schoolhouses. Some details changed over the years, embellished or simplified, but the core remained the same. A cowboy shared his last blanket with a shivering stranger, and at sunrise, she revealed her true identity. And from that moment of kindness and trust grew a love that transformed both their lives and echoed through generations. In the end, it was more than just a love story. It was a testament to the power of compassion, to the courage it takes to be vulnerable, and to the magic that can happen when two people truly see each other and choose to build something beautiful together. It was a reminder that the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest consequences, that the choices we make in our darkest moments can lead us toward our brightest futures. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Carter and Rose were still together, still holding hands, still sharing a blanket against the cold of eternity, their love a warm fire that would never go out.